So welcome everyone. Today is our second time doing this webinar, this time for the Hudson Valley group. So we're happy to be with you today, even though we're not in person. We're happy to be with you via Zoom. My name is Daniela Labate-Cavelli. I'm from Niaparis. We're a MCTAC partner, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Eve Addis.
Hello.
Where you wave, Eve.
Hello.
Thank you, Eve. So we are MCTAC partners. Today's offering is called, whoops, apparently I'm not going back. Oh, geez.
It doesn't go back?
All right, well, today is Workforce Priorities. The conversation continues. And today's offering was put together by net partners from Niaparis, partners from the Coalition for Behavioral Health, as well as ASAP. So if you're new to MCTAC, which we're not sure if anybody is anybody new to MCTAC? Has anybody never been to a MCTAC offering before? If you have not, could you just like put a hi in the chat box if this is your first offering for MCTAC of this kind? All right. So we we do have some new folks. Look at that. Oh, we don't. It wasn't.
No,
it wasn't. It wasn't a new person.
No,
oh well. But you know, our overall goal then is to prepare and assist providers with the transition to Medicaid managed care. This is all of our partners. So this is kind of what our hope is for you all today. We have a few different learning objectives for today. So the first one is, you know, ICL has been doing this discussion series on workforce priorities, and we thought it would be kind of cool to literally continue the conversation with all of you, and we would do this by region. So we're really going to sort of focus on organizational culture today, and we hope that today's conversation will help you to broaden your own awareness of your organization's culture, maybe to identify at least one item that you can start to take action on to begin to address as part of your organization's culture, and even maybe think about how you can be better prepared to face any external factors that contribute to your organization's culture. So that being said, you know, we want this to be interactive. So we are, right now you're all muted. You've come into the room muted, but we want you to participate as much as you'd like. So you can do that several ways. The first way is to unmute your phone and join the conversation. In order to unmute your phone, all you have to do is scroll down to the bottom toolbar and hover over to the left-hand side. There should be a little telephone icon, and you can unmute yourself that way. You can also, if you don't have a mic on your phone, on your laptop rather, or your computer, you can also dial in. There's a phone number to dial in, or you can use the chat box feature. So we're going to be stopping and asking questions throughout. We're going to hopefully have quite a robust conversation with you all today and share some ideas and thoughts with each other. And the only other thing that we would ask that you do is when you're not speaking, just to keep your phone muted so that we don't have a whole lot of background noise. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We do only have, you know, these are small groups, and we've sort of set these up that way on purpose so that we can sort of take a few minutes to get to know who's on the phone and on the line. If you'd like to just introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and why you came today, what you hope to get out of today's meeting. So I think the easiest way, if you all don't mind, is for me to just sort of call on folks using the participant list. That way we don't have everybody trying to speak at the same time. So if you can, please just join us and, you know, say who you are and where you're from. So Jacob, do you want to get us started?
Sure. My name's Jake Colomb, and I'm from Champlain Valley Family Center up in Plattsburgh, New York. I'm the clinical director of our substance use outpatient facility.
Great.
Anything that has human or staff development and resilience in the same sentence, I want to be part of. So
cool.
Great.
Welcome.
Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you.
Sandra or Sandra. I'm not sure how you pronounce your name. Sandra M.
It's Sandra. How are you?
Sandra. Good.
I work for independent living in Middletown. Well, actually Middletown, but was stationed in Newburgh, New York. And I just wanted to sharpen my tools. And if anytime there's an opportunity to learn more things, I'm all for it.
All right. Awesome. And what's your role there? I think you might have mentioned it, but I missed it. I'm sorry.
Peer support specialist.
Good.
Okay. Great. Great. And then we have a second Sandra who chatted in the chat box that she is from Children's Aid in the Bronx. Thank you very much.
Is that part of the Hudson Valley?
It is kind of lower, very lower Hudson Valley.
Very lower
right?
Hudson Valley.
The very
Welcome,
beginning
Sandra.
of the Hudson Valley.
Welcome.
Sashana, am I saying your name correctly? If you can unmute and join us, that'd be great. If not, if you want to just use the chat box and let us know where you're from. We're going to move on to David A.
Can't hear you, David.
We're having trouble hearing David. I heard him for a second, but I think we lost him. All right. Well, that was great. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. And as folks come on, you know, they'll be joining us. There we go. All right. So let's get into the material. And before we actually get into the material, I have just one sort of one other last comment to make is there's a lot of material in today's PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is going to be posted. So you'll see that on the MCTAC CTAC website. But there's a lot of material here, and we did that on purpose because we wanted to give you as much information as we possibly could. We may not be able to get to all of it today, and we may be, you know, we may sort of run through some slides much quicker than the others. But we did just want to mention that from the get-go. So we're going to start by talking about organizational health and defining what organizational health is. So Eve, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so actually, you know, when we talk about organizational health, Jake at the beginning said he's interested whenever he sees the word workforce and the word resilience in the same sentence. So yeah, I think that that's very important because when we talk about, first of all, an organization is its workforce. In the human services, an organization is defined by its workforce. Its workforce is what produces the outcomes, goals, objectives of the organization. And so the organizational health organizational health is dependent on the health of the workforce. And we're talking here, you know, because when we think of health, we think of, you know, the stethoscope that's the graphic that's on this slide. We think of, you know, physical health. When we're talking about organization, we're talking about, you know, looking at an organization through a lens of what makes an organization healthy. And healthy means that the organization is doing well. The organization is sustainable, if you will. So there are static measures for that. So we look at the financial revenue that an organization has to support its operations. So that's, you know, clearly, if an organization can't support its salaries, can't support its workforce by being able to pay its salaries and to pay all the other expenses, it's not a sustainable organization. Then sustainability is also a function of, and health, again, sustainability and health is a function of the compliance that the organization has with the regulations of its licensing or its funding entity. If you are an organization that is reimbursed by Medicaid, then you have to comply with the expectations of the payers, the managed care organizations, and, you know, the community, of course, that you're in, and you know, certainly the people that you're serving. So an organization that's out of sync with compliance with all of these elements is an organization that is in trouble. So sustainability is sort of, how do you put it, you know, not stable. And then there's workforce competence, and that goes back to what I said earlier, that the workforce is the organization. So an organization is not going to be able to be sustainable if its workforce does not have the skills to act and perform in a way that meets with the organization's goals, objectives, and aspirations. The consumer's satisfaction is also another measure. If you are an organization where you're not meeting the needs and you're not meeting the preferences of the people you serve, you're going to have no customers and you're not sustainable because you're going to go out of business. And then last but not least is the workforce. And that goes back to the importance of a workforce in a human services organization, is that if you have a workforce that is unhappy, a workforce that has a low morale, where workforce does not feel satisfied, if you will, then you've got a problem, because then you don't have the kind of productivity and the kind of, how shall I put this, commitment of the workforce to the mission and vision and aspirations of the organization. So then those are sort of the kind of, measures that you can kind of take. You can do all these kinds of surveys and get responses. You can look at your spreadsheets and see that you're financially viable. So those are the static measures. Here now, on this slide, we're looking at the more dynamic measures. So these are things that are more, nuanced. So alignment of organizational values, mission, and aspirations across the organizational hierarchy. This is critical. In particular, it's critical in a time of impact. We started this conversation by saying that, resiliency, again, in health, is when an organization is able to respond adequately to the unknown, the unforeseen, something that comes on very suddenly and has a lot of impact on the operations of the organization. And COVID is certainly an example we're all living through right now. So when we're talking about alignment, this was a factor that actually was the deciding factor for a lot of organizations in responding to the COVID crisis. Those organizations that were aligned, that across the hierarchy of the organization, from the executive director and the C-suite executives all the way to the people on the front lines performing the organization's functions, if they were not aligned and clear about what their values and mission and objectives were, that was an organization that was not able to answer in a timely way, to respond in a timely way, and in an effective way to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second bullet is really exactly that. If an organization is aligned well, an organization then has capacity to adapt. So a lot of changes had to be enacted very quickly as a result of COVID. And an organization's capacity to adapt to the needs and the changing needs and this changing environment brought on by COVID, adaptation was a function of alignment. If an organization was well aligned and things were clear to everyone, then that organization had a much easier time adapting to making the necessary changes. And finally, again, last but not least, is the issue of safety. And this is on three dimensions, physical safety, personal safety, and relational safety. And safety is a factor that is important, because if people are preoccupied with their safety, whether it's their physical safety, personal safety, or relational safety, they're not likely to be able to put all their efforts in being productive and in being effective in the work that they do. So people need to feel safe in order to be at their best and do their best work. So along those three dimensions, the physical space, of course, has to be, and again, if you want to relate it to COVID, ultimately, how did we create a physical space in our environments to make people feel safe? That's a very kind of obvious example, but there are more nuanced and subtle ones So just cleanliness of the space, creating a space that's conducive to people's work and so on. Personal environments, and this has to do with a person's personal safety, a person feeling that their input is important, that their time with other people in the organization is valued, and that they are respected. And this, somewhere in there, is also the whole issue of equity and inclusivity that we're all very concerned with right now. So a person's ability to feel safe in the environment personally. And then the last is relational, and that is how safe people feel in their encounters with their supervisors, with the leadership of the organization, even with their colleagues. So this is a matter of being able to feel that the relationships are trustworthy, and they are not going to be injured inadvertently by any of the relationships that they have to engage in. Next. Okay, so we sort of have been using the terms organizational health and resilience almost interchangeably, because in effect, they're not exactly the same thing, but resilience is a function of health. If an organization is healthy, then it can be resilient. As I explained, resiliency in response to the COVID crisis had a lot to do with the factors that we named in terms of organizational health, or how we measure health. So other kinds of sudden impact that people or organizations can be subjected to is budget cuts. And that's something that's looming in our futures right now. We're looking at a big shortfall in the state budget. But there are other things. There are also sort of epidemics, not pandemics, but I remember in my career, there was back in the 90s, there was a crack epidemic in New York City, maybe across the country, and we had to kind of respond to that very quickly. It's something that became very evident very quickly in our experiences with working with people in housing at that time. The other one, of course, a little bit earlier than that, was the AIDS epidemic. So these are all things in the environment over which we have no control, but our ability to respond to them and respond quickly and effectively is what would be a measure of resilience. So that requires us to be nimble, flexible, and agile. So the question here is, in terms of a workforce, to think about your own workforce, or to think about yourself as part of a workforce. Is your organization or are you flexible and agile? If something happened and your supervisor came to you, for those people on the phone who are on the front lines, and asked you to go to another department and work in a slightly different way than what you are doing right now, or with a slightly different population, would you be able to do that? And that becomes sort of a measure of resilience, that an organization can jump quickly to meet a need that's out there with ease. And then, when it comes to being hit with sudden impact, as we refer to it, with a sudden kind of need or environmental stressor, is this organization one that is sort of bogged down by needing 10 or 12 levels of approval before a decision can turn to action? Or are managers at different levels of organizational decision making able to make decisions on their own? What happened? Okay. And so again, swift action without having to go through a lot of red tape is the issue here. It's empowering a workforce to make decisions commensurate with their position. And finally, and again, last but not least, is communication, clear, frequent, and transparent. This is a trust issue. Do people trust what they hear? And is what they're hearing sort of up to date? So for, again, using the example of COVID-19, organizations have very, very frequent communications with their staff. In fact, I know organizations that had staff meetings or huddles or cluster meetings 2 and 3 times a day. And that the communication was consistent, the communication was for everyone, everyone understood the same thing at the same time. And that gave people the ability to move swiftly, to be nimble and agile. So communication from the top down and across the organization is very important in keeping an organization resilient.
So before we move on to the next slide, I just want to call your attention to the chat box. I did type in, there is a resource tool called the Organizational Culture Assessment Questionnaire. It's a 1-pager, and we actually found that resource, and we pulled the 1, 2, 3, 4 of those bullet point questions from that questionnaire. So it's kind of a nice tool we thought we would share, that you can sit down, you can do it with, you know, maybe various persons on your executive team could do it separately, and then sort of meet up together and see, does everyone have the same idea? And are you on the same page about where your organizational culture is, or what your organization's culture is, or maybe you're not. So it's just a nice tool. We thought we'd share it. It's also at the on the resources slide at the end of the presentation.
Does anybody have any questions at this point before we move to the next section?
Feel free to use the chat box, or you can also unmute yourself, remember.
Okay, I guess I did a good job, Daniela.
You must have. Although I do see it, I just see somebody chatting something in here.
Not at this time. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Well, we're going to keep checking in with you guys. All right. So the next part of what we wanted to talk to you today about is around what the role of human resources is in how human resources can promote and support organizations' health and resilience. Because, you know, it's not just about fixing the culture, although sometimes it is. Sometimes it's about maintaining that culture, right? So we want to make sure that we kind of keep the consistency going. And I think consistency is the word that you're going to hear us use quite a bit today. So we'll get into that a little bit. So here are some of the main bullet point functions of HR, things that HR does to support an organization's health and resilience. So the first is that HR should be someone who's on the executive team. Is there a director of HR? Is there an HR generalist? This person needs to be in a high-level decision-making position. So the question I always ask at this point is, who here in the room with us today has a dedicated HR staff, whether that's one person or a group of people at your organization whose sole job is devoted to human resources? If you could just maybe like put in the chat box, that's me, or we have that, or you could unmute yourself. So we're trying to get a feel for who's in the room as far as what your HR looks like. Do you have a dedicated human resources professional? Do you have, you know, someone whose role is human resources as well as another job or function at the agency? Do you outsource your human resources?
Well, two people said that they have that. Jake and
great.
Sandra said they have someone who's dedicated. Does that mean that everybody else doesn't? I guess it does.
Perhaps. I can tell you, I've worked at organizations where we've outsourced our human resources, and that poses its other, you know, a whole other host of potential challenges. You know, it's really important that that HR person is part of your executive team and that that person is involved in communication, right? So being accessible may or may not be an issue when you have someone who's working remotely. Because, you know, their job is to work with your organization, but also with many others. Another function of HR is getting people in the door, right? So how do you recruit, how do you hire, and how do you onboard your workforce? And that's everybody across the board, right? It's your direct care staff, it's your maintenance staff, it's your finance staff, it's, you know, everyone across the agency. How do we recruit folks whose values align with the organization's values, whose skills are what they need to be in order to provide the quality services that your organization should be providing. Also, communication, we can't stress this one enough, because that HR person is usually, you know, in between communicating with different levels of staff, right? They have to be data driven. They've got to have information. So they have to have information on health outcomes. What, you know, speaking with a manager in an outpatient behavioral health program is really important for an HR person when they're hiring for that direct care staff, because they need to know what outcomes we're looking for as an organization. And they need to be able to know that so they can hire the right person. And they need to be able to know that so that they can plan for training so that the current staff has the skills that they need to do the work that they can to meet those outcomes.
Can I give an example of that, Daniela? So, for
Sure.
example, in your example, you go a clinic, a mental health clinic. So, you know, it turns out that this mental health clinic is collecting data on patient outcomes, client outcomes, and what they find is that somehow there is negative outcomes for the population they're served who have a mental illness and a substance use disorder, just as an example. And so the HR manager gets a request to hire a psychotherapist. You know, if that HR person has that information about the outcome, about that outcome I just mentioned, they might get back to the manager of the clinic and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, you really should hire somebody with a KSAC, because it sounds like there's something that you need here, because your outcomes are showing us that you're not really doing as big a bang up job with a particular group of consumers who need whose needs are not being met. So this is why data is important, and this is why the HR person needs to have access to this data in order to be able to facilitate the development of a workforce that, again, as Daniela said, meets the needs of the consumers in the community that the organization serves and is able to fulfill the organizational mission.
I'll give you another example just to piggyback off of that. So you're working at a clinic and you've got a really high no-show rate for a particular clinician. That particular clinician has a very high call-out rate. They don't come to work as often as they probably should, and they use a lot of their sick time and their vacation time. That's a real issue for HR, right? For two reasons. Number one, because that HR person then has to be able to facilitate conversation and communication between the supervisor and the clinician about what's going on, how can we help you get to work, because now your folks aren't showing up to their appointments. And maybe there's an issue with culture where perhaps the clients are saying, we don't, you know, it's really not important for me to come because it's not important for you to come to work. So that culture sort of trickles down. And whatever culture your staff has, your workforce has, sort of always trickles down to the culture of the folks coming in for services. And they affect each other quite greatly, I think. Okay, so let's move on. Oh, I'm having difficulty with my slides today. I really do apologize. Okay, so consistency. So this is sort of the beginning of the term consistency that you're going to hear us use a lot. So HR really has to make sure that there is this consistency between what we're calling the employee journey and employment. So basically, what does that mean? So is what you're selling, is your brand, what you market to folks, and what your employment experience is as someone working at the agency, are they consistent? Is what it's really like to work here what you signed on for when you took the job? Is staff doing the job that they were hired to do in the way that they were hired to do it? All of those things sort of affect the culture. Is the workforce's behavior aligned with the organization's mission? Do they know what the organization's mission, vision, and values are? And are they aligned with each other? Do you want to say anything else on that part? I know you'd like to speak on this bullet point, Eve.
Well, I'm just going to say that you better be, you should be very careful about the language that you use in your, what you say when you put out an announcement for an available position. Because you don't want to mislead people when you don't really come up with the goods, once people are hired. So I would just say be cautious and describe what you are, as Daniela said, what you're selling in a way that doesn't mislead someone, so that when they come on the job, they're met with a completely different reality.
Well, you're also not wasting each other's time, right? So if you're putting a job description out there that doesn't actually match what the job is, you're not going to get the person that you want for that. It all has to match, right? So you don't want to waste a potential employee's time coming in and then starting to talk about a job that you've posted incorrectly or you've misleadingly, posted about. We're actually going to spend a little bit of time on job descriptions later on, but something to think about here is, when was the last time your job descriptions were updated, right? As the former director of a program, I could tell you that I was guilty of not always updating job descriptions. I think I probably admit, I will admit that I used to update job descriptions when I had a vacancy, and that's not really the best practice. So it's really important that as a manager, as a program director, as a supervisor, you're making sure that your job descriptions for the employees you supervise are up to date, and that your HR department knows about what those job descriptions are.
Yeah, especially that you're going to be doing performance evaluations, and then you're going to, sort of comment on somebody's performance, and the person will look at you and say, well, I didn't know that I had to do that. It's not on my job description. So that's the transparency piece. That, I'm sorry I brought you into the next bullet, Daniela, but that's what transparency is. It's really, having clarity and not holding back information that people need in order to be their most effective in the work that they do.
Yep, exactly. Supervision and workforce management, another major function. You want to make sure sort of that everybody, back to the job description, right, knows what they should be doing, when they should be doing it, how they should be doing it. Policies and procedures are intact. I can't stress how important those policies and procedures and employee handbooks are. Feeling safe. So we're not just talking about physically feeling safe. That is important, of course, but we also, safe to speak up, safe to share an opinion, safe to share culture.
Safe to make a mistake.
Yes. Safe to make a mistake is a big one. Because you want people to be able to learn, right? Being on a job is not just about doing a job, but it's also enhancing someone's skills and learning and developing and cultivating that person as an employee.
Right. That builds, by the way, a lot of loyalty. So if you're looking to have a high morale in your organization, you want to do whatever you can to enhance loyalty. And I've worked with some of my clients, and I came across a client a couple of years ago, and that in their description, in their mission statement, they define themselves as a learning organization, and I find that to be really very unusual, and because they really believe in that. They believe that part of their culture is that people who work for them, in addition to having skills and being able to perform, there's also an openness to learning, and that's an important part of, guess what, quality services, because quality and maintaining quality means learning about new practices, about what an evidence-based models are, and then also learning involves making mistakes. And so a learning organization is an organization that says, well, we will all make mistakes and we will learn from our mistakes. So those are the kinds of things that give people a sense of safety. And then also that sense of safety results in retention. And we all want retention because, you know, hiring, recruiting are very expensive propositions. They cost a lot of money. And when people leave organizations, there's a loss of productivity. So there's a financial stake here as well. In terms of health, and going back to the beginning in terms of revenue, you don't want to waste money unnecessarily on hiring and recruiting. You want to be proactive in having policies, procedures, transparency, supervision, safety, and all of that in order to retain your workforce and especially retain talent, because talent is very hard to come by.
Absolutely. And finally, we have to mention diversity, equity, and inclusion. I will say, and I'm sure Eve, you'll agree with me, that we could probably have a whole webinar series on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's really important that you have to be consistent. You know, does your organization's hierarchy look like your direct care staff? Does that look like the folks that are coming in for services? Like, are there disparities there? How do you address those disparities? Are you addressing those disparities? So something we want you to think about.
There are resources also on the, oh, you're going to say that? Go ahead, Danielle, I'm sorry.
Yeah, took the words literally right out of my mouth. Yes, there are tons of resources out there. CTAC has a bunch of webinars. You can, you know, go on the ctacny.org website and look at some resources there. Our partners at the Coalition for Behavioral Health have some resources. So feel free to sort of search around for those as well. All right, so let's check in again. Any questions about what we've kind of brought up so far before we get into the next section? Because this is now, I think we're getting into sort of the meat of it now, right? So how do we maintain that? Now that you know what a resilient culture looks like, that you know what a healthy culture looks like, how do you keep it that way? Once you get it, how do you keep it that way?
Okay, so you know, the steps here, I think we've sort of mentioned some of them in passing up to this point, but the employee manual needs to be consistent with the brand and what you promise employees. And so, for example, if you say you are a trauma-informed organization, well, the language in your manual needs to reflect what trauma-informed language is. It needs to have policies around employee management that are also trauma-informed. So again, this is the consistency, this is the transparency about, you know, really, you know, walking the talk. So the employee manual is important because it conveys to the employee, for example, is this a safe place to work? Secondly, again, back to the subject of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Now, we're talking here not about a casual sort of conversation. We're really talking about a very, very kind of worked out, detailed plan, you know, around how you're going to address the issues around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And you know, we're talking here about all the definitions of inclusion. So it's not only race and gender, but it's also around diverse educational, cultural, and of course, lived experience. So, so what I say here is all organizations, especially with what we are experiencing now in the larger world around us, should really have a dedicated plan around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then,
can I
you know,
just add one quick thing, Eve? We're starting to see organizations have an equity or diversity officer in some organizations as well.
Yes,
so that someone's specific role at the organization is to really be planful around this idea.
Yeah, and you know, well, I'm not going to say any more around that, but I will say that look around and see what resources, as Daniela presented earlier, around this, because there's a lot out there now, and and I encourage you to familiarize yourself with everything that you can get your hands on. Now, this is really a deal breaker very often in terms of maintaining a healthy and resilient organization. If you don't invest in your workforce, you're going to find yourself out of sync with services that yield the desired outcomes. Investing in your workforce means being able to look at what's needed out there to derive the best outcomes of the services from the services you deliver, and making sure that your workforce is skilled to deliver those services. And the investment here is in training. The investment here is in supervision. Supervision, I find in many organizations is taken very lightly. I don't know why, but it doesn't have the kind of gravitas, that it should. Supervision is a very important part of helping a workforce develop and helping a workforce learn the skills they need to do the best job they can do. It's a terrible thing to have a job that you have to do and feel helpless in not having the skills, the toolbox to do it.
All right, so while we're talking about keeping your employees, let's move on to workforce retention strategies. So what are the things you can do to make sure that your workforce is happy, to make sure that they stay with you, that you spend all this, you invest a lot of time and money into keeping your workforce there. So what do, right? So there's a couple of things we're suggesting here. So the first is, employee wellness. What kinds of things do you offer your staff, your perks? We're talking about EAPs, perhaps. We're talking about health plans. We're talking about team building. It could be anything, we're not necessarily talking about money, but we're talking about things that you can offer your staff to make them feel good about the job that they're doing when they do a really good job. What are you doing to sort of help foster growth in your workforce? So workforce development. What are you doing to offer them training to help them sort of move up the ladder? Oftentimes we hear from organizations where you've got a program director who started out as a housing counselor and now they're a program director and they're moving towards COO and hopefully CEO. What are you doing to cultivate your staff, to give them the skills that they need to sort of move up? We think that's really important, and that's what, like those wellness strategies, those workforce development strategies, that's what keeps your staff there. And quite honestly, if your staff is happy, the clients are happy, right? It all sort of trickles down, and then you've potentially got some really good outcomes because they understand that it's a place that they want to be at. The culture of an organization is quite, what's the word? Like you can feel it. You can feel the energy in the air, right? So if I feel like, it's an upbeat culture, like we're excited to be there, that people want to be there, then I'm going to want to come there. I'm going to want to come to work. I'm not going to wake up every morning dreading to come to work because the culture amongst the staff is like, a little tense. You want to feel that culture.
I want to say something here, Daniela, about wellness, because I think that, that can mean a lot of different things. I think that what we mean by wellness here is that there's an intentional approach that an organization has in recognizing that the work in human services, the work itself can be very stressful for employees. And there's a lot of burnout in our sector. And burnout is really a function of having to work in environments where employees are dealing with the stress of others and exposed to the stress and distress of others. And that needs to be recognized by an organization who wants to be healthy and resilient, because that kind of distress on an ongoing basis for that front-facing, client-facing employee, that frontline employee, can break down resilience. And ultimately, when resilience breaks down in the employee, of course, across the board, it could end up in hurting the resilience of the organization by extension. And so a healthy organization really attends in a very deliberate way to the wellness of its employees. And they can do that in a number of ways, addressing it, giving people flexible schedules, allowing people a certain amount of time off, and then, having structures in place like EAPs and other kinds of resources that people can get in order to stay well. So,
Yep.
It's not a casual, newsletter that tells people about, a good diet and how to take a walk every day for 15 minutes. It has to be, that's important because that demonstrates an organization's interest in the employee's wellness, but it's not enough. It has to be a very carefully wrought plan for it to have the kind of impact that you want it
And
to have.
especially nowadays when more people are working remotely and they're working from home and they've got, kids that are home and trying to do schoolwork with kids, it's really important to sort of think about overall wellness and, what specifically you can do as an employer to make sure that your workforce continues to be well.
Yeah, working from home is not all that it's cracked up to be. And I think people are beginning to feel that now. And Zoom fatigue is beginning to set in a lot of settings where it's exhausting, where people have to be helped in how to manage this new virtual service delivery environment.
Well, think about it. We used to get up and walk from one office to the other to communicate with each other. And we don't have that ability to do that anymore. And so, and it's affecting us, I think, in two ways. One is physically, because we're sitting behind our desks, or we're sitting somewhere, wherever we're working from at home for a lot of the day. And we're not physically moving around as much as we used to, right? Climbing stairs, walking around an office. And then that person-to-person aspect of, communicating with someone in vivo is very different when you're using, the computer or the telephone instead of just popping into somene's office real quick or having lunch with a colleague.
Not to mention the stress brought on by an unstable internet, right?
that is the truth.
That your Zoom
and I really don't mean to be laughing.
Right. We live
Actually,
that.
I'll tell. Well, the inside joke, folks, is that this is Eve and I. This is our problem all the time. So one of the places where Eve works from has an unstable internet connection. So I always laugh and I say, "Are we going to lose you today?"
Yeah, well,
but it's a real issue. It's a real issue for a lot of people, and a lot of people may not have access to very good internet, or may not have access to internet at all.
Oh.
And that goes back to, I think, equity and diversity and inclusion, and we could go on about that. So let's move on in the slides just because we're getting a little backed up here in time. What does feedback look like? What do those feedback loops look like? Are employees given the opportunity to share their opinions, to share their thoughts, to come up with ideas and really innovate and be part of the conversation and part of the decision-making process, right? Who makes the decisions at your organization? Is it just the C-suite level folks, the CEOs, the CFOs, the COOs? Or is it program directors and direct care staff having a conversation with those other folks to make informed decisions together? How's feedback encouraged? Are you only giving feedback to your employees once a year when you do their evaluations?
Or when they do something wrong, right?
That's another good one, right? Or only when they're doing something wrong. Giving compliments and praise is just as important, right? Because you want to keep people motivated to do things. Like, culture is contagious. So you want to keep that culture up here as much as you possibly can. Because everything on this slide really is about, engaging your staff and what we can do to keep your staff, your workforce engaged.
Let me just give you one quick example of that. I work for an organization where we identified a problem. I won't tell you what it is, but we identified a problem in the organization, and the big sort of kahunas all got together, and we're trying to figure out a solution. And then somebody had a great idea and said, why don't we do a contest? And this was sort of a little goofy, but we did a contest, and we pointed out what the problem was, and we said anybody who comes up with the solution that we implement, so it had to be an implementable solution. When we implement the solution, that person is going to get, and we came up with an amount of money as an incentive. And we got so many suggestions from folks. And actually, one suggestion was so beautiful and creative that we actually implemented it. And none of us in that room initially, you know, with all our years of experience and our fancy titles, would have come up with that solution, because it was very specifically a solution that only somebody on the ground could have come up with. And you know, sort of, you know, but you know, that was a one-time deal. I bring it up because it was so great. But if you have an organization that has that culture of encouraging people to make suggestions and really respecting people, whatever suggestions they make, and you know, even if a suggestion is off the wall, but just an attitude of we welcome innovation, think in an innovative way, that is extremely rewarding to staff. And this is not only with regard to clinical, you know, sort of, you know, the staff that does the work of the organization with clients. This is in all departments, because all departments have problems that need to be solved. And if those problems, if you engage the workforce in solving the problems, you have a really very, very much happier workforce.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move into the tools and resources. There are several tools and resources throughout the Workforce Priorities series that are already out, and then there's a couple more that are coming out. So we wanted to just call your attention to them. We're going to sort of talk about some of them today. So we have the sample job descriptions to promote a recovery-focused workplace. We can't really stress enough how important it is that the language that we use to bring our staff in, the language that we use with our workforce, how that has to match and has to be consistent with our mission, vision, and values. It all needs to be aligned. Like there's no other way to kind of put it. We also have some interview questions that were developed by the ICL folks. So there's 3 different interview question tools or resources. One is around recovery focus and person-centered care. The other is around trauma-informed approaches, and the other is around whole health or integration of physical and behavioral health. So you'll see those. You'll see some other resources on the screen. So let's take a few minutes to kind of go into what some of these resources look like and how these might be beneficial.
So integrated health here is really that whole person approach to service delivery. And it's kind of getting away from that siloed approach that was evident in our work so many years ago, where, you know, a mental health organization did work with people from the head, from the neck up, and you know, a medical practice did interventions and work with people from the neck down, and the two, never the twain shall meet. Well, we're now in a much more sophisticated understanding that, you know, when we're dealing with people, no matter what our area of primary focus is, we can't ignore the rest of the human being. We have very well integrated bodies. You know, our heads and our organs all work together, and so to deliver care in a sort of siloed way is completely antithetical to the human organism. So, you know, when you're talking about interviewing somebody for a job, you want to make sure that, you know, you're asking questions that will kind of elicit from the person their understanding and their belief, more than anything, that whole health is important, and they do look at people in this holistic way. You know, the other kinds of questions are around getting clear, kind of asking the kinds of scenario questions where you get at what they have used as strategies in the past to help clients improve and becoming well. And so you want to ask questions that push for a person's knowledge around health integration, their understanding conceptually of it, and their own personal attitudes. So the interview guide will kind of help you to ask the kinds of questions that give you that information so that you could make the right hiring choice.
Right. there's a couple questions we wanted to just focus on around recovery focus and person-centered care. You know, things about helping you to understand what someone's recovery principles might be, what their attitudes are towards recovery and person-centered care. You know, are these folks that you're trying to hire, are they going to sort of walk alongside the individual they're providing services to, or are they going to walk 3 feet in front of them? You obviously want the folks that are going to walk alongside. You know, Eve and I were chatting earlier today, and we were having a conversation about similar to this and about the interview guides. And we were saying, you know, the interview guides are really great because they have questions on them around, you know, what are the things you want to look for, you know, asking questions that will elicit and get some of the information that you're looking for around whole person care and integrated care, rather, recovery focus, person-centered care, having a trauma-informed approach. There are some questions on there that are specific to hiring supervisors. But we were also talking, you know, some of these questions will apply across the board, not just for direct care staff, right? Because for me, it's important if I'm working at an organization, I want everybody to have a recovery focus. And that goes, you know, the accountant, you know, the CFO, the maintenance staff. I mean, everybody sort of plays a role in the organization's culture. So I want everybody to sort of have that same belief that I do around recovery, because, you know, I'll tell you a story real quick, which I shared with Eve earlier. You know, I once worked at a place where there was a certain staff person that used to get in the elevator and used to put their face inside their shirt in the elevator when we were with clients in the elevator, because the clients smelled too badly for them. So rather than addressing, you know, an issue or asking what's wrong or how come this is an issue for someone, they just didn't understand, you know, what the potential issues were, or, you know, they didn't understand recovery. They didn't understand behavioral health challenges that people have. And it was really offensive. It was offensive to me. It was offensive to other people. And we ended up, you know, actually we ended up addressing it with the individual, but they just couldn't wrap their head around it. And they did not have that same mindset, and they didn't have those same beliefs and values as we did. And we found it difficult to work with that individual, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and that, by the way, if you have, you know, sort of, you have to act very quickly when you made a mistake and you've hired someone, because there's a toxicity that can set in to an organization, and that will break down its resilience and its health, because, you know, again, that alignment, so that everybody needs to be aligned around what recovery is, and, you know, and all the aspects of recovery. So, you know, respect for people who may be different from you, people with different experiences. So, you know, all this stuff, I mean, when you think about it, you could take all these slides and do a big mashup, and they would be relevant in terms of the way all of this sort of is integrated. It's one big package around, you know, the issues of equity and inclusion, and the issues of recovery and person-centered care and trauma-informed, and retention of staff and hiring. And so it all, you know, it's all kind of enmeshed. And so when you think about this, it's very easy to kind of track you know, connect all the dots is what I'm trying to say. All the dots here are connected, and they all lead back to this whole idea of organizational health and resiliency.
So, are you feeling chatty today out there, folks? We sure hope so, because we've done a lot of chatting today. So the question we posed to you is, how could these questions help you to recruit and hire employees who share your organization's beliefs and practices? It doesn't have to be around whole health, but just your organization's beliefs and practices in general. And if you're not in a position where you're hiring someone or recruiting an employee, you know, what does it make you think about your organization's culture and your organization's beliefs and your colleagues' beliefs? Feel free to chime in, unmute yourselves, use the chat box, think about it, be pensive.
Hi guys, it's Sandra.
Hi.
I just wanted to say that I find this webinar exceptionally helpful. I have been in a supervisory position. I am not at this moment, but I've been loving everything you guys saying because you get it. Whether you're the CEO, the CFO, whether you're the one that just came in from the beginning, you guys get it, and you're giving us the tools and reminding us of how important these tools are. So I'm loving this webinar, so thank you.
Okay, I think we
Awesome.
can
We
leave.
like to
We
hear
can
that.
leave now, Daniela. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you for that. You made my day. I
You
need a
guys
lot.
have made
I
mine.
need a lot of praise. I need a lot of praise.
You're welcome.
You're
Okay,
too
we have an
funny.
HR department at St. Vincent, so we just gotta. Okay,
Oh, good.
I'm looking at
Very
the
good.
chat.
I imagine you have quite a big HR department at St. Vincent's because you've got a lot of programs. Yes.
So Jennifer, let me ask you, since you wrote in, and I'm not picking on you, but I just wonder, you know, well, you've identified yourself, and maybe you don't want to, you know, reveal, but where do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10 your HR department is in terms of the elements that we've discussed for organizational health and culture? How does your HR department support that at St. Vincent's?
And actually, I want to take what you asked and sort of shift that question slightly, because I think HR is just part of it, a big part of it, don't get me wrong. But remember, HR is part of the executive team, and those teams need to work together.
Correct.
So I think it's important to also sort of, you know, you could have a very strong HR department, but your HR department won't be successful if it's not fully integrated, I guess is my point.
Yeah. Well, it was a loaded question, Jennifer. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. But does anybody else want to chime in around that issue? Okay.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Jake. I want to say again, reiterate what was already said, that really helpful webinar. A couple key things. It's been reinforcing for me at our agency that, you know, we've been able to respond quickly, you know, and COVID was the big, you know, sudden impact, right? And we didn't really skip a beat. So it makes me think that we're pretty resilient, which means we have good health, you know, in our organization. The second thing I was thinking about, you know, these things, these sudden impacts come all the time. It could be as simple as, you know, somebody calling in sick. In a small agency, we have 10 clinicians, you know, multiple groups running throughout the course of the day, and caseloads that are, you know, everybody's busy. So, you know, when you got somebody that scrambles, somebody that calls in sick in the morning, and you got to figure out how you're going to cover group and get an assessment moved around. And we have multiple departments where, you know, we have case act working in different departments. We got a housing program, we have, you know, and and we got a case management program. It's nothing to pull the housing guy in to cover a group at 1 o'clock. Or somebody from case management to come over and cover a group. So that part's cool. I think another point that I picked up on here is, you know, how do you manage morale in the staff and through these times especially. And there was times when we were in the midst of this in March and April, you know, when we were really, you know, we had our own anxieties coming to work and trying to figure out how we were going to deliver services. And, you know, there was times where we didn't do business as usual. We went outside and we did some team building stuff. And we allowed some time for the staff to take more breaks and get outside and do things that were going to help them get through their own anxieties. And then the pressure of how do we deliver these life-saving services to the people that need us, right? So so enjoying the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you for telling us all that. I think I think your culture sounds like it's a good example of what we're talking about.
I think it's easier, in a smaller agency. I don't, and we are more like a family here, and I guess, because we have the luxury of knowing each other, whether we like each other or not. We know things about one another, and we're fortunate that we all get along, and I can imagine we're in bigger programs where the staff just doesn't have that opportunity to get to know one another. That's likely more difficult to manage.
Yeah, and I hope when you said like a small family, a small functional family, because
most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time.
Like
Thanks,
any
Jake.
family.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. No, we have a chat box. So I don't know.
Yeah,
it's signed by Louise Ellis and not Jennifer Spitz, even though it says it's from Jennifer Spitz. So I'm a little confused. So maybe Louise Ellis is using a coworker. Okay.
Perhaps.
Well,
yeah.
Okay. Well, so what I'm reading here is that your organization does help employees feel like they're making a valuable contribution. So that's a good sign. I mean, that's one of those measures of organizational health and resilience.
Absolutely.
Yep. What did you say once, Daniela? You said something about that the true measure is that when people, you said it today, I think, when you said about people happy to be at work, and that when you walk into an environment.
That culture is contagious?
Right. That people, that you could feel that when you walk into a place where the people are happy to be at work, or when you walk in and they all give you their business cards and tell you, let me know if you have an opening, right?
I mean, I give this example all the time, which means I should probably change doctor's offices, because I always have stories about these things that happen when I go to the doctor. But there's like a line of people to check in, and then the person behind the glass barely looks up at you, and it's like, hello, I'm here, and it's like just walking into the room kind of like sucks the life out of you a little bit. And I don't want that. I happen to really like my doctor. I don't like anyone else in her giant practice, but I really like her. And that's the reason I keep going back. But the environment is one that you want, you want that environment to sort of lift you up, not like shrink you down. So soft skills, we just have to mention soft skills because I think it's super important, especially, when I was in a position where I was, hiring staff, I think soft skills are really, really important. Things like, collaboration, communication, compassion, and empathy, are the ability to share power. I would never hire a supervisor that did not have that skill, because it's, power sharing, I think, is really important. I would really never hire anyone that I didn't think had that skill. But think about it, for a supervisor, you want that supervisor to be able to share power, to be able to teach, and to have someone learn from them, and to, be open to suggestions and brainstorm. I think I said this earlier, walk alongside, not walk in front of. Be able to listen and not be judgmental, be able to use language that is de-escalating and not escalating. When you're confronting someone and having a difficult conversation, it's really important to be able to use language that does not escalate the situation, does not put someone on the defensive. So all those things I think are really important, and they're not necessarily things that you learn in school. So it may not matter, what someone's background is sometimes, but I think soft skills are important too, and it's something we need to probe about when we're looking at someone's, background around trauma-informed approaches and recovery orientation and whole health and all that other stuff we look for.
Daniela, you mentioned supervisors in your, if you're hiring a supervisor. Well, because why? So this is all the parallel process, right? If a supervisor demonstrates these attributes in their work with their supervisees, the supervisees are learning something, and they're likely to take those, to cultivate those skills in the supervisee, and that supervisee will now use those skills to engage with their clients. And that same level of soft skills, these soft skills, have to be reflected at the leadership level. So
Absolutely.
so that if this is the culture of your organization, then these are the things that have to, again, be aligned, getting back to the beginning, across the hierarchy. So the employee manual, the policies and procedures that exist in the organization that are sort of the roadmap, or you will, the manual for the organization, have to sort of live these what we call soft skills. So that, they may be soft skills, but they're very critical in terms of an
100%.
in human services, in terms of an organizational health and resilience.
100%. I'm looking at empathy and compassion, for example. Fortunately, I have never worked in an organization where this takes place. But I do know someone who struggles with this where she works. And the issue is that, like, honestly, there are people in positions, superior positions, positions of authority, above her, that yell, and they yell in staff meetings, and they yell at staff, and they yell with, other colleagues on their level, as well as folks who are direct care staff.
Wrong.
And that's just not an environment that I want to be around. And it makes it really difficult for her to come to work, because she dreads going to work, because she doesn't want to be around that. And it's really, it brings the whole culture down, to be quite honest, from what I understand.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go into, actually, I think we have a question before we go into the next section. Yeah. So for the folks on the line, what do you think about soft skills and how that contributes to an organization's culture? And maybe if you want to give us an example, feel free to do that too.
This is Jake. I can weigh in a little bit. I think model and behavior from the top down is always a good way to lead. In my position as a clinical director, I still carry a caseload as well, but the way I treat staff, I think, does model behavior. The respect that I give them is the respect that I want everybody walking in our door to have. And that being said, there's times I have to be really, really mindful of that, because I'm a human being and I have my own flaws and shortcomings, and so I got to be mindful of that, but I certainly understand the importance of it.
Yeah, Jake, you just said something very important here, and we didn't mention it, but another measure of organizational health and resiliency is self-awareness. And that, I don't know, is that a soft skill? Maybe we have to include it in that slide. But self-awareness is and understanding your impact, the impact that you have. Part of the self-awareness, the impact that you have on people, is really key. And it's almost like an underpinning for all those other things, because if you're not self-aware, and if you don't value self-awareness in the organization, I think that it's very hard then to be healthy and resilient, because that's our own mechanism for managing ourselves, right? It's in being aware of what kind of an impact we have on the world. So thank you for that. I think that that's an important consideration.
And we got a chat in the chat box. Most important to build community within your organization. It's a team effort. Good point. So what we build in our own organizations, in our culture, in our own organizations, sort of trickles out into what we present out to the world too, right? So to really be embedded in the community, you've got to have a strong sense of your own community within your organization.
Well, whoever sent that comment in, what's your take on how do you build community? I mean, you mentioned that it's important, and I agree, but how do you do that? How do you do that in your organizations, or how is it done in your organization, if it's there? Yes, Louise. So Louise, tell us tell us, you know, how that gets built. How do you build community? Or how did you do it? Or how does your organization do it?
Louise must be typing a lot. So Louise, while you're typing about that, we're just going to move on real quick just because of the interest of time here. So we're going to move through the next bit of this rather quickly, although we do want to say that we think it's rather important to talk about job descriptions. So it's really important for you to sort of include what the overview of your organization is, as well as what those job responsibilities are. And we want you to use language that aligns, that's consistent, again, to use that word consistent, consistent with your organization's mission, vision, and values. You want to use words that drive, you know, that are reinforcing recovery a recovery orientation, showing that participants are driving the services, not that, you know, vice versa is happening. So here's some examples of what you might include on some job descriptions under job responsibilities. Work together with clients to help them develop coping skills that will help them manage trauma triggers more effectively. Minimum 3 years experience working with people using a recovery perspective. So when you're looking at, you know, what people's backgrounds are, and you're thinking about what kind of experience you're looking for, also think about language like partner with, or I can never say this word, familiarity with, when you're coming up with your job descriptions and your job responsibilities. E, did you want to go back to that comment? I see Louise wrote something in.
Yeah, Louise wrote in, lots of team meetings to hear everyone's opinion. Okay, that's an openness, right? An openness, we talked about
and communication
that.
And transparency.
Right. And come to consensus for delivery of service, for change, etc. That's good. I mean, that's sort of that everybody's on the same page, the consensus piece. But remember that you also want people to be able to make decisions that are consistent with the organizations. So you want to empower people. Not every decision has to be by consensus, especially in a very large organization where that could really bog the process down. Could you go back to that other slide first for a second?
Oh, this one?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Or maybe the one before.
No, this. Yeah, I just want to say here that, you know, when it's, Daniela mentioned this before, you know, this isn't, you know, these questions seem to be focused on people in sort of more clinical roles. But you may be hiring somebody who's not at all, you know, who's in, you know, finance, or who's working in the maintenance arena, or in some other non-client facing
a kitchen
job.
Although you are facing clients in the kitchen most times.
Well, right, but I mean, not in terms of service delivery in that specific way, you know, right? So what I'm saying is you could still ask questions that kind of let you know, you know. I'm just going to give you a quick example. I once interviewed, we were looking for a maintenance supervisor, and we had a big housing component where I was working, and it was a very important position because there were like over 25 buildings that this person would have. So that person was, Danielle said, would be coming into contact with a lot of people. And we hired a lot of people, and there were some very competent, you know, maintenance licensed, I mean, people who came with a lot of credentials and had worked in, but you know what? We hired somebody not who was short in those areas, but we hired the person who, in the interview, when we were trying to make the person way that, you know, this is a setting where you're going to be working with people who have disabilities, blah blah blah, and the person used the word hope in their answer, and they really had this sense that, you know, hope is what makes people very often improve and get to the lives they want to lead. And he said something about it, and we all have to have hope. And you know what? we were all so floored by that, because we must have interviewed 15 people, and he's the only one who had that and who gave us that, and we hired him. And it turned out to be one of the best hires we ever had, because he really got it. When he walked into a building to fix an elevator, he had an idea of what that broken elevator meant to the people who live there. And it wasn't just about having to take the stairs. So I say that to you because you need to look for those things that you're trying to kind of cultivate in your organization, in all the people that work in your organization. I just had to say that.
All right, well said. All right, so just sort of one last slide on job descriptions, and I think, you know, it's sort of like we've already been through this, but language is really important, however you choose to advertise for your positions. The key takeaway here is, you know, make sure that your job responsibilities align with the actual work that someone is going to do. How you post it is what they're going to be doing, and that it's all aligned and consistent with the organization's overall mission, vision, and values. So this is sort of our last chat question of the day. You know, we hope that you've gotten something out of today's conversation. You know, we are curious to hear from you. You know, sort of what's your key takeaway? Is there something that you might consider a top priority for your organization, for you to begin to address? Is there a strength that you would like to share with us? You know, let us know sort of what you're thinking. Oh, someone wrote in the chat box, thanks for saying that. We're working with non-clinical staff to check in and listen to their concerns as well. Great. All right, so does anyone have any questions for us? Anything we would you'd like for us to try to address in the last 3 minutes here? Feel free to unmute or chat. I see a chat coming in here. I think we could improve in having HR be a bigger part of the culture of the clinical team. Okay, so maybe bolster communication a little bit, it sounds like.
That's good.
Yep.
If you got
Excellent.
that out of this, then we've done a good job. Be aware that burnout is not just among clinical staff. Reach out and train other staff as well. Absolutely.
Yes, big time.
That's you know, that's right. You know, that's very true. Thank you for adding that.
Yeah. Actually, and that's something we should address when we talk about staff wellness. You know, I thank you for bringing that to our attention. You're right. Absolutely. So a couple of things we just wanted to sort of remind you of, let you know about. We do have another webinar that there was actually a webinar today in the Workforce Priority Series. So if you weren't available for that one, you can catch the recording at ctacny.org. There's also the final webinar is on the 1st. I think it's the final webinar, I'm not sure. The employee engagement webinar, and then the screening tool package is coming out on the 15th. I think there's going to be a short video that accompanies that to sort of help put it all into perspective. So be on the lookout for that, and you can register for those events and get all that information at ctacny.org. Someone says they're actually hiring 2 staff members and rebuilt job descriptions to reflect changes in the workflow. Great, great. Glad we could help. Glad we could help. So with that, I think we're at the middle of the hour here. So I would like to thank all of you for coming today and for participating as much as you did. Eve, thanks for joining me as usual, my partner in crime on some of these things. And Connor, thank you for being behind the scenes. She actually just posted the link where you can find the workforce priorities, how to attract, hire, and retain the right people for today's behavioral health world. That's in the chat box, so we're going to leave that up for a minute. If you'd like to copy paste that into your browser, you are more than welcome to do that, and that'll take you right to the CTAC page where all of the webinars are right there for you to click on.
So we really enjoyed meeting you all today, and we want to wish you a lot of good luck and health in the weeks ahead, and keep on trucking.
Indeed. And hopefully we'll see you in person soon, if not on Zoom. Take care, everyone. Be well.
Bye-bye.